Welcome to our segment called Washington Current Review. This will be hosted by the famous, or properly said, this man fits into the class of rich and famous. He is none other than Mr. Frank Islam, who is the chairman and CEO of FI Investment Group located in Tysons Corner, Virginia. Today, Mr. Frank Islam has a rather interesting guest on his show. Who is it? I don't really know. Come on over, join me, and let's discover together.
This is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of FI Investment Group and your host of Washington Current Review, where we interview leading voices from business and politics and explore topics of current interest that impacts you, the viewer. Today, our guest is Dr. Anil Gupta, who's a professor at the Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland in College Park, who's the author of many business books and a leading authority on entrepreneurship. People like him is a source of inspiration for all of us. We will be exploring the issue of the globalizing the young venture. And I want to introduce to my viewer, this is the book that Dr. Gupta has written, one of the best books that I have ever read and known about it. So please, if you get a chance, read this book. Welcome, Professor Gupta.
Delighted to be here.
Thank you very much coming on our show. We appreciated that very much. My question to you is, should the young entrepreneurs consider global opportunities from day one? I have been an entrepreneur for a long time, and I've always been said, but if you're small, you cannot deploy your resources, and you need to be focused, and therefore stay local. But you're advocating something that is very innovative and exciting. Tell us a little bit about it.
I think it depends on the kind of venture we are talking about.
Okay.
So I would advocate very strongly that for some ventures, early entrepreneurship early globalization is a very sensible thing to do, but not necessarily for others. And it depends very much on the nature of the business. So in some businesses, the imperatives for early globalization are very strong. So for example, if it's a B2B business and your customers are global customers, or if the scale economies for product development in terms of the upfront investment that you have to make are very high, and the economics of global delivery are very favorable to you, then in fact early globalization is a good thing. But there are other ventures where the need for physical infrastructure country by country is very high, where the adaptation across countries is very high. Then early globalization can be very challenging. Just take as an example, so if you take Google versus say Amazon, that Google doesn't need physical infrastructure.
That's true.
Amazon needs physical infrastructure. So if you look at the early histories in the first 2 to 3 years of Amazon versus Google, Google globalized at a much more rapid pace than Amazon did. So I think we have to look at business by business.
Very good answer. Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta. Let me ask you the next question to you. What does a young company need to consider if it wants to go global? What kind of thing they need to consider?
Yeah. And I think that the way I would come at that question would be in terms of what are the key questions that the young company needs to ask. So number one is, why do we need to globalize? What are the benefits? What are the costs? Because early globalization for a young company is certainly more challenging than it is for a more established, a bigger company. Second is that globalization can be front-end globalization, which is globalization of customers and markets, or it can be back-end globalization in terms of globalization of operations or product development or services. And so for us, for the young venture, the question would be, do I want to globalize my front end or globalize the back end, or both at the same time? Third, if it's globalization, let's say, of the front end, that do I want to go country by country, or is my business such, as we were discussing earlier, that I can go to multiple countries at the same time? So those would be at least some of the critical questions that the entrepreneur would have to answer right away.
Those are the good answers. Thank you very much. My next question to you is, should the early stage companies focus on one global market and many of them simultaneously at a given time?
I think it depends, again, on the nature of the business. Because as a strategy professor, I firmly believe that the answer to most of the strategy questions depends on the nature of the industry that we are in. So I take as an example, take Apruva Corporation, which is a company headquartered here in Virginia. Prashant Bokasam, who is the CEO. Now, Apruva is in internal control software. It's B2B. Now, and particularly their software is needed by large companies like Procter & Gamble. Now, if Procter & Gamble is going to buy software for internal controls, they don't want it for just one country. They need it for the global enterprise. So a company like Apruva had to go global across all markets at the same time.
In order to sell their product.
In order to sell the product. Similarly, let's say, take another company headquartered born out of China, out of Shanghai. So it's a company called Chinese Pod. And what they do is they teach Chinese to people, to non-Chinese people, predominantly English-speaking people, through the iPod. So they basically push out their lessons that are extremely user-friendly through the net to the iPods. Now here the economics of global delivery are very, very simple. And the marketplace is totally global. So what Chinese Pod did is that very much right in the first year of the company's founding itself, they saw the market as global rather than just one country. On the other hand, let's say that you're in the business of selling children's clothing. Now, children's clothing requires physical infrastructure. It requires consideration of the nature of the local market. And I think a company there, if it starts to globalize across multiple countries, it's taking in far too much complexity far too early, and it's likely to fall down.
My next question to you, it involves a lot of risk. It costs a lot of money. Doesn't global strategies increase risk and cost for companies as well?
Yes. And in fact, I mean, globalization is, like all good things in life, has major pluses and at the same time major costs, major minuses.
Correct.
And so is it worth it or not depends partly on the nature of the industry, as we were discussing earlier. How strong are the imperatives? How large are the benefits? Versus what is the nature of the complexity and the challenge? But also it depends very much on the capabilities of the leadership team. So, for example, I have in my own research noted that entrepreneurs, let's say when they are doing a second venture, and if they had experience at globalizing the first venture, then the second time around, they might actually go global at an earlier stage. If you have VCs, if you have strategic advisors who bring with them global experience, global connections, then that can again reduce the costs and risks from early globalization. So it depends very much on what the capabilities are and how rapidly the leadership team can build the capabilities.
If you're a young company, it's very hard for a young company to compete in the world market because you need to deploy your resources, you need money, you need a lot of capital, you need a lot of people, you need a lot of resources. My question to you is, does the current worldwide slowdown, as you know, we got a meltdown right now as far as the financial crisis is concerned, make globalization easier or harder?
I think it would depend very much on where you're sitting. So let's say if you're an entrepreneur and you're sitting in the US or in Europe today, given that we probably already are in a recession we are not going to come out of it next year.
I wouldn't think so.
It might take us 2 years.
So it's not bottomed out yet.
It's not bottomed out yet, exactly. So if you're starting a young company, a new venture in the US or Europe, actually for you, early globalization may be an extremely important thing because you need to go where the growth is, and the growth might be in India, the growth might be in China, Latin America. On the other hand, if let's say you're a young entrepreneur sitting in India, and last year you were thinking that you're going to start chasing markets in Europe and the US, today you might want to reconsider that and say, let me for the next 2 years focus on the domestic market. So it's basically a question of where are you sitting and what is the nature of the growth in the market that you basically your home market.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Gupta, and your answer is excellent. I appreciate that very much. I know you just flew in from China, as I understand. So thank you for coming to our show.
Appreciate
thank you very,
much,
very much.